Philippines is one of the countries that has the most expensive electricity rates, with 25 US cents per kilowatt hour as reported in 2011. Our rates are even higher than that of Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia. In fact, we are included in the list of top 5 countries with high power rates, along with Denmark, Germany, Italy, and Austria. There are many factors why this is the case, one of them being our dependence on oil, coal, and natural gas, all of which have prices that have skyrocketed. In June 2001, then-President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo signed into law the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, or EPIRA. The law was designed to bring down electricity rates and improve the delivery of power supply, as well as generate competition that will benefit consumers in terms of better rates and services. With the implementation of EPIRA, how have consumers benefited from it? What does unbundling of electricity rates mean? By unbundling the electricity rates, will it make it easier for consumers to understand how they're being charged monthly? Good evening, you're watching Legal Help Desk. This show is about making the law work for you by giving legal advice on topics that matter to you. I'm Attorney Nepomuceno, and tonight we'll discuss what you need to know about understanding your unbundled electricity bill, which is under RA 9136, the Electric Power Industry Reform Act, or EPIRA. Our guests for tonight are Attorney Juan, Executive Director of the Energy Regulatory Commission, or ERC, and Ms. Irma Exconde, Assistant Director of the Department of Energy's Electric Power Industry Management Bureau. Good evening, Attorney Juan and Irma. Can I call you ICE?
Yes, that's
and Attorney Nino.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, Attorney.
Good evening. All right. We all know that this topic is very relevant to our consumers. They're always wondering what their electric bill will be. A lot of people are asking, why are there so many, I guess, categories or subtotals in their electric bill? And sometimes they don't understand it. So tonight we will try to address all of those questions. But before that, let's just differentiate, or should we say, specify your specific roles, no? When it comes to energy and electricity generation and regarding this topic. ICE, you're with the Department of Energy.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and you're specifically with the Electric Power Industry Management Bureau.
Yes.
What is the specific role of this bureau?
Yeah, the Power Bureau is specifically for power industry, but the entire DOE has different sectors also. Yep. We have the upstream. When we say upstream, it's the resource development. So we have the gas, the oil, the coal being developed by different investors.
So in layman's terms, where you source the raw materials for the electricity.
Yeah, to be an input to the power generation.
So it's not just electricity.
Yes, but specifically for and also energy efficiency is part of the DOE's mandate to promote energy efficiency. But for the Power Bureau, it's basically we are the policy making body of the department which supervise the DOE's role under the Electric Power Industry Reform Act. So basically, we would like to ensure that there is energy supply security, affordability, and quality at all times.
All right. And now, so Attorney Nino, the ERC naman, would it be more on the pricing?
Yes, on the regulation of the different players in the different sectors of the power industry. So ERC is the independent quasi-judicial body created also by EPIRA. We take on the traditional role of a regulator for the electric power industry, but since the EPIRA restructured the power industry with the objective of introducing a competition in some of the sectors in the power industry, we were also given the mandate to act as the competition body to be able to monitor the activities, the behavior of the different players in these competitive sectors.
All right, perfect. So, so let's start off with the EPIRA law. No? You mentioned it. This is RA 9136, Electric Power Industry Reform Act. Again, just to clarify to our viewers, you cover more than electricity, diba?
Yes, that's right.
You cover the resource development, coal and gas as well. But ERC is specifically for electricity.
For the electricity,
correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So, but when it comes to EPIRA, though, is this specifically for electricity only?
Yes,
it's only for electricity.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Can you maybe perhaps, Attorney Nino, you can give us a quick summary of the EPIRA law, just the highlights and what would be relevant to our televiewers?
As I mentioned, IPIRA restructured the power industry with the end in view of introducing competition. And to be able to accomplish this, there was a need to privatize also the generation sector, which used to be handled by the state-owned National Power Corporation. So after privatization, the theory is that there'd be more players in the generation sector, and then it becomes possible now to introduce competition in this sector. Until up to the retail level, we will be having competition.
Okay, now, if something like this, no, where you open this industry for competition, I'll ask you, Ice, traditionally, perhaps we may have bases in models abroad, in the US perhaps. Is it fair to say that this will provide a way or pave the way for perhaps more affordable electricity?
Yes, that's basically the objective when IPIRA was passed, to make the industry more efficient and with more, but mas mataas ang efficiency, then lower cost. And that's basically also the same with other jurisdictions. They implement a reform like this, like we did, like the unbundling of the functional. Actually, the unbundling is composed of both functional at saka yung rates.
Yung rates, oh.
Yeah, so the functions, we have 4 sectors now. Unlike before, there's only 3 sectors we have, which is monopoly, or it's the National Power Corporation, as mentioned by Attorney Juan.
NAPOCOR was the one that
was
generating
doing
solely.
the generation and the transmission. Well, there are distribution utilities nationwide, both the private and then the electric cooperatives.
So are we saying that the opening of the industry to competition is more centered on the generation part and not on the transmission and distribution? Is it more on the generation part?
Yes, the lines businesses, the transmission and distribution, because they are by nature monopolies, they will remain to be monopolies. The franchised the utilities in specific areas would continue to provide the transmission or the distribution services, and they continue to be subject to rate regulation by ERC.
Now, again, as a consumer, and I guess as a layperson, if you're having one monopoly, all right, well, that's kind of when you say one monopoly, that's basically the same thing. You know? So, but if you have one big giant company handling all of this, let's say transmission, my general thinking is that there are cost efficiencies because, and again, you might want to correct me, if you have, if you're handling if there's one company and you're handling all of the consumers, the customers, if you will, then you have certain cost efficiencies. The cost per kilowatt hour would probably be less because you're handling more customers, diba? And then the moment you have different players there, then there won't be any cost efficiencies. Is that correct? That's the reason why when it comes to transmission and distribution, we will still retain the monopolies. Is that correct?
If you leave the monopolist alone, it will now depend on the behavior of the monopolist. Right. Because if there is no competition, there may no longer be any incentive for it to be efficient.
And that's the reason why
there's ERC to exact efficiencies out of the monopolist.
All right. So that's, again, it's for our viewers to understand. No? So when it comes to transmission and generation, the monopolies or the franchises are still there. Correct?
Transmission and distribution.
And distribution.
Yes.
But when it comes to the generation, that's when
and the supply also.
That's when we have open competition. Now, and as you mentioned, ICE, in other jurisdictions, has this worked in lowering costs of electricity?
Well, it worked because up to this time they're still under this same environment, a market-based environment. So I presume it's working for them based on our discussions or meetings with them also.
But since there won't be any cost efficiencies now, how will having several, I guess, generating companies work out to lower the cost specifically? How would that work? Is it because of competition? So
yes, for the generation sector, when there is already competition, we can anticipate that the different generation companies will try to outdo or outbid each other so that they can gain a bigger share of the market. And that is where efficiencies in operation will figure in so that they can try to maintain their prices and attract more distribution utilities to buy from them.
All right, I should mention earlier about unbundling. I think that's the word of the day, unbundling of the electricity bill, and I think a lot of people are curious with that. And we'll take that up, but meantime, we need to take a short break. Legal Help Desk will return, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're still watching Legal Help Desk with our guests, Executive Director Saturnino Juan and Assistant Director Irma Esconde. All right, before the break, we did mention the word unbundled, which I guess to a lot of consumers seems to be a magic word, but they kind of don't know what it really means. No? So, as you mentioned it beforehand, unbundling, but should I ask you about the unbundling of the tariffs, or should I ask Attorney Nino?
Probably I'll just provide my thoughts as the Department of Energy on the unbundling.
Okay.
Well, unbundling is part of the preconditions prior to retail competition and open access, which means ngayon po may ARCOA, we call it simply ARCOA. So there's a choice for those customers or na may demand na 1 megawatt and above. So ito yung malalaki na customers. So
1 megawatt
and above average demand for electricity. So right now, yung the unbundling was done to ensure there is transparency once na meron na tayong retail competition.
Okay.
So they're aware of what are they paying, the different.
So it's only for big consumers that you're unbundling it?
No, it's for all.
For all.
But this is part of the preparatory for the retail competition and open access. And Attorney Juan can provide you the details of the unbundled rates.
So yeah, Attorney Juan, can you give us a bit of an overview on this unbundling?
Yes, the unbundling of rates actually prepare us for the eventual implementation of retail competition. Before EPIRA, what we can see only in the electric bill that we pay is the charge known as the basic charge. And the basic charge will include not just the payment for the distribution company, but also payment for the transmission and the generation.
Before EPIRA, it was all bundled in one amount.
Yes, it was all bundled in.
And you don't know how much
Yes.
of your, let's say, 5,000 peso bill goes to transmission?
To transmission, to the generation. And there's also included in the basic charge the payment for the system loss. So we don't see that in the electricity bill, that we're also paying for the system loss even before EPIRA. And then, aside from the basic charge, we can see the adjustments, the currency exchange adjustment, then the PPA, the power purchase adjustment. So you don't know where or how these adjustments were computed. Then come the EPIRA, and under EPIRA, there was a mandate for the unbundling of the rates. When we say unbundling, the basic charge that we used to pay before, it was just segregated into the different charges, and from the nomenclature of the different charges, you would know already where these charges are, or what these charges are for. So for the generation charge that we see included in the bill of the distribution company, we know that this generation charge answers for the cost of the power that is delivered to us by the distribution company. And so also with the transmission charge that we pay in our electricity bill, this transmission charge is our share in the cost of the transmission. Because the power from the generation plants, it will have to be transmitted through the transmission lines before they reach the distribution lines, and then before they get delivered to us. So aside from that, we have also itemized the different other components of the retail bill.
What are the other components?
Such as the system loss. This used to be embedded just in the basic charge and the power purchase adjustment. Now you can see that there's a separate charge for the system loss. And then the other charges authorized by law, like taxes, then you have the universal charge.
Yung systems loss na yan, again, some people may not understand it, but sometimes even I don't understand. What do you mean exactly by systems loss? Does it mean that the consumers are bearing the brunt of the losses or the inefficiencies of the generating company?
No, they're shouldering the cost of the power that is needed by the distribution company for it to be able to serve all its customers. Because power that comes from the generation company, say the distribution company needed 110 or 100 100 units, it might need not just 100 units from the generation company, but 110, because along the transmission, there will be some losses. And what the distribution company will pay the generation company is equivalent not just to 100, but to 110, the one actually supplied by the generation company. So that is part of the cost of the distribution company, and which we pay not in the generation or in the transmission, but it's unbundled under the system loss charge.
Okay, what are the advantages and disadvantages of unbundling it and bundling it? Do you think that there's a specific, apart from transparency, are there any specific advantages and disadvantages specifically for the consumers?
I think it's more of, at the end of the day, it's empowering the consumers. Because if you're aware of what you're paying, then you have an opportunity to ask your distributor, like for example, if you're here in Metro Manila, like Meralco, you can ask, why is my bill like this? Or probably why is there an increase? Because you can see the increase and the decrease every month in the uses of the different components of the unbundled rate. So it's basically one of the objective of PPRA, which is empowering the consumers also. So that's basically what.
Now, when it comes to, let's say, generation and transmission and distribution charges, is it based on your use, meaning it's variable, or is it usually a fixed cost, like spread over?
There are different methodologies that will apply to the determination or fixing of the various charges that we see in our electricity bill. For the generation, we regulate indirectly the generation charges imposed by the distribution utilities through the review of the power supply agreements that they enter into. So we make a determination, ERC does make the determination of what should be included in the generation charge. As for the distribution, these distribution charges are regulated, so before any adjustment can be implemented by the distribution companies in distribution, they'll have to seek first the approval of ERC.
Now, as consumers, what should they be looking at in their bill? Specifically, yung bang, is it the distribution part or generation part, or they should be checking all aspects of their bill?
For the distribution part, they can check it, and if they want validation, they can always ask ERC if the distribution charge imposed on them is actually the approved distribution charge. For the generation, it's a little more complicated because every month the generation charge of our distribution utilities, they vary because it depends on the generation cost that they incur. And the generation cost or the power cost, a lot of factors can influence these costs, not just the price per kilowatt hour, but also the quantity that they offtake from each supplier, including the wholesale electricity spot market.
Okay, let's talk about that a bit. Yung sometimes people don't understand. All of a sudden, their electric bill goes up, no? And there are, as you mentioned, Attorney Nino, variations in the cost components of electric bill. And sometimes, and I have to admit, even and I'm a lawyer, and I look at my electric bill, I get a little confused. Now, what more mga consumers natin? What should they be looking at? Should they be, every month, should they be comparing, let's say, each of the components? You think that's sound advice, that every month they're compare, let's say, the generation cost involved and the system's loss involved, and then also the I guess generation cost. Is that how they should be checking their bills?
Ideally, that's being a smart consumer, right? But if you look at your bills, you can see that the biggest part of it is the generation charge, which was mentioned by
the producing of the energy.
And as mentioned also by Attorney Juan, there are these bilateral contracts. I mean, they already have a contract for some of their part of their supply or bulk of their supply from the different generators of power at different technologies. That's why the DOE, we are in the process or continuous process of determining what is the optimal mix of power supply of the different utilities. We have now starting, or we are in the process of introducing the demand aggregation supply auctioning policy. So this is for the individual distribution utilities or electric cooperatives to have an opportunity to go together or aggregate their demand to be able to secure supply at the least
At
cost.
a better price, yeah.
Yeah, through an auction.
So through an auction.
So, and this is not only for the next 3 to 5 years, but rather this is more a long-term supply.
And this is part of the EPIRA law, the auctioning, or this has been happening
well,
for
actually, this is not a direct provision under EPIRA, but rather it's more on the list cost. There's a particular mandate for the Department of Energy to introduce policies that will ensure efficiency in the securing of supply of the distribution utilities, or the least cost supply for the consumers through the distribution utilities contracts.
I see.
So this is more of, that's why, as I mentioned earlier, the department is more on ensuring supply security, which is from short, medium to long term, to ensure that we have adequate supply of electricity.
Perfect. All right. We have a couple of questions from our televiewers, but we need to take a short break. Legal Help Desk will be back after these messages. Don't go away. Welcome back to Legal Help Desk with our guests, ERC Executive Director Saturnino Juan and Assistant Director Irma Esconde. Now, we have a couple of questions now from our viewers, and one of them is from Benjamin. Why are there so many items listed on my electric bill? What are these things, and why am I being charged for these? You like to take a shot, Attorney Nino?
These different charges represent the different companies that actually contribute towards the production and delivery of the electricity or power to the household. So from the generation, transmission, distribution, you can see that before power is delivered to us, it undergoes a lot of stages, and different companies or providers are involved.
Maraming components, in other words.
Yes.
And why is it it's only an electricity bill? Why not, let's say, in gas? For example, when you charge a liter of gas, it's hindi naman naka-indicate there, you know, the cost of generating that petroleum product. Why is that? Why is it important that we have it in our electric bill?
For electricity, as I mentioned earlier, this is a preparation for eventual implementation of retail competition. So when we are already adept at looking at the electricity bill, and we are already conscious that a big part of it comes from generation, once we're under retail competition already and we can already choose our supplier, then we can look for the supplier that can give or that can supply us power at the least cost. So we can already compare what is your charge for the generation. How about you?
Right.
So you can now compare and choose which of these different suppliers can supply you at the least cost.
And that is happening already abroad,
Yes,
right?
yes, that's right. Even
so
at the household level or
the household level, you can
yes.
already
like
you can
in New
already choose.
Zealand, yes.
But of course, the transmission and distribution is the same. As we mentioned it off the air, you said that by necessity, kailangan there's only one group that's doing the transmission and distribution.
Yes.
Why is that? Like in the case of Metro Manila, it has to be Meralco, right?
Yes.
Why is that, Ice?
Yes, definitely in all sectors, actually, if there's a single line that is needed, like for example, in the transmission distribution, and if you put a parallel line, that's already an efficient one because of the big investment that goes with it. And there's a franchise being given to these particular companies. Like for example, for Metro Manila and nearby provinces, it's Meralco.
So in
there's
other words,
only
for Metro
one.
Manila,
There's a franchise
we
being
will
given
still
to
be
them.
dealing with Meralco, but
Yes.
later on we can choose already
The generation
part.
yes.
The supplier
The
of the
supplier.
power.
So eventually
Supplier.
we will have, is this correct? Eventually we will have two bills, one for Meralco for the transmission and the other one would be
Well,
for...
that is possible, but in the meantime,
Yes.
what we're doing is still having one bill for the contestable customer, the one already under the retail competition. So it's now the supplier, the licensed supplier, that bills the customer, and the licensed supplier will just pay Meralco, and
I
Meralco
see.
pays the transmission company.
I see. All right. Now, our next question is from Shane. How does Meralco and other electric companies base how they charge their customers? Who determines the rates and how? What are the factors for these companies to increase their rates? Yeah.
That is the job of ERC to set the rates for distribution of the various distribution companies. And we have basically two kinds of distribution companies, the privately owned and the electric cooperatives. Depending on the kind of distribution company, we have a specific rate setting methodology applicable to set the rates of these distribution
In layman's terms,
companies.
how is that methodology done?
We take a look at the revenue requirement, what will be needed, what revenue will be needed by the company for it to be able to operate, say, in a year's time, and recover its recoverable cost and also return, a reasonable return on its investment.
Kasi importante na they are profitable.
Yes.
It's important.
Yes, that's for the privately
that's
owned.
Yes.
But for the
For the
electric
cooperatives,
cooperatives that are basically non-stock, non-profit, we set the rates based on purely cost recovery. So how much will it take for, say, an electric cooperative to provide the service for all its customers for a year? Then we divide that with the expected kilowatt-hour sales, and then we come out with the rate for that electric cooperative. But right now, what we do is we group them. We group these electric cooperatives, the similar cooperatives, and then we set a rate for this particular group. And then they will have to adjust to this particular rate. If the rate is a little lower than what they actually need, then they will have to be more efficient, bring down their costs so that they can survive with that rate.
All right. Now, our next question is from Tim. Is it possible for electric companies to give a fixed monthly consumable supply of electricity to its consumers instead of charging us depending on how much we consume? Ice, would you be in a position to answer that?
Yeah, I'll also have some thoughts on this one. Actually, right now the consumers have the option. I think there's an introduction of this
fixed monthly
I mean,
rate.
you have it's similar to prepaid or something
Prepaid.
because
Our charging basically is either per kilowatt hour, so per unit of energy that we consume, we are charged a fixed rate for that for generation. But for transmission and distribution, it will depend on the customer. So there are cases when there is charging known as the demand charge for the transmission and distribution. But basically, if you ask, can we just have a fixed generation charge for the customer? It is possible, but then we will have to adjust the rate setting methodology to account for the variation every month. So there can be a provision for that. And then after, say, a year, there can just be a true up.
Okay, so walang mga unli.
Yes.
Unli
And then for
use o ganun
for
para sa mga telco, di ba?
kilowatt hour, if that's what you're saying, it's hard because our charging is on a per unit.
Per unit.
Yeah.
Per unit. All right. And now from Steven, will unbundling of electricity rates pave the way for the unbundling of other necessities like water? As I was asking earlier, so gas or other, I guess, public utilities. Will it pave the way for example, water?
It maybe depends on the policy of the state whether or not to move towards, say, privatization of certain sectors, because as what happened in the electricity sector, unbundling became necessary for the introduction of retail competition so that there can be transparency as to what charges can be subject of competition and what charges should remain to be regulated.
Okay. Now, Ice, there is general consensus among Filipinos that, and I think it's kind of common knowledge, that electricity rates are quite expensive here compared to other countries. First of all, let me ask you, is that a fair statement that our electricity rates are higher than most countries, or at least we're one of the highest
yes,
when it comes to electric costs?
Yeah, statistics says that Philippines is one of the highest in Asian countries. Yes,
And I guess the next question there is why? Why is it? so expensive here?
Well, compared to other countries, especially our neighboring countries in ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, our rates is not subsidized as compared to the our other countries. And well, basically, and that's a big, what do you call this? The subsidy is a big component of the other countries' rates. And,
was it not subsidized before? It was never subsidized?
Well, yes, it was never subsidized, right?
Electricity has never subsidized.
For EPIRA, because the generation is provided by National Power Corporation and the NPC rate is regulated, it will now depend on the government whether or not to ask for additional or an increased rate if its cost increases. Because it can live with a lower rate, but the extra amount needed can just come from government, and government will just raise it through other means.
Through taxes, I guess.
Yes.
So now, how does the, there's also a question here, how does the EPIRA law affect the co-ops, the cooperatives, especially in the provinces? Here in Metro Manila, we kind of know how it affects Meralco, I suppose. But for co-ops, cooperatives, how does the EPIRA law benefit or probably not benefit the cooperatives?
The EPIRA actually called for the electric cooperatives and with the assistance of NEA to improve so that they can operate under this restructured environment. Because under the environment then, they will just need to contract with the state-owned power company and then just get the supply. But under this deregulated, without NPC now, they'll have to look for their own sources of supply, of power to their customers.
And
so they
can talk to several
they would have
generating
to
companies.
talk to these different generation companies, and they would need the savvy for them to be able to negotiate a good price for their customers.
They'll be able to evaluate each of the power generating companies, right?
And that's exactly what I'm saying earlier. That's why, as part of our policy, we are introducing the aggregation of these small electric cooperatives for them to be able to contract supply. They can have a leverage if they come
if
together.
they're bigger, they can leverage.
They can leverage for the terms and conditions.
And you're overseeing that? You're overseeing the aggregation and the aggregation of
we're
the
currently
different
in the process of coming up with a policy, but of course with the support of the Energy Regulatory Commission with regards to the entire process and also the rates involved in the terms and conditions.
Okay, there's another question regarding why electricity is so expensive here, and I guess the question has something to do with the geographic nature of the Philippines. Now, we are an archipelago, but before I ask that, we need to take a short break. Legal Help Desk will return after these messages. Don't go away. Welcome back to Legal Help Desk with our guests, attorneys Attornino Juan and Assistant Director Irma Esconde, and we're discussing the EPIRA law and its effects on the electric bill of consumers. Now, there was a question asked earlier regarding again our high electricity rates. As you mentioned earlier, Ice, our electricity rates are higher than most countries, partly because of the subsidies. But is it because also of the fact that we're an archipelago? And I would imagine that you were mentioning earlier about electricity and it being distributed along grids, diba? And since perhaps in the US it's probably easier because they're like one big square country. In our case, because we're an archipelago and there are inundations and mountains all over, is that the reason why we can never have lower electricity rates?
When it comes to the archipelagic nature of our country, it will reflect more on the transmission.
On the transmission.
Yeah, on the transmission, but not
on the generation.
not on the generation probably. Except for under the market rate, the WESM, because the farther you are from the source of your power supply, there's a sort of additional cost on the in your bill. So basically, that's the difference. Well, I think that's the archipelagic nature will not affect much.
Now, when it comes to, again, this EPIRA law, are we addressing ways on how to make electricity more cost effective? Perhaps, Nino, if you can answer that. Does the EPIRA law address that? Sort of like ways on how to make it more efficient?
I think so. In terms of the regulated sectors, the transmission and distribution, we do exact efficiencies from the different generation or distribution companies with the way we set the rates for them. So they would need to be efficient in their operation, and to incentivize them in the current rate setting methodology, there's a system of rewards and penalties for them to be able to improve their operations.
What are those rewards and penalties?
Like if the private distribution company will be able to operate at less than the operation and maintenance expense that we approve for them, then they get to keep the efficiencies, because the following reset of their rates, we would know already that they would need a lower operation and maintenance expense. And so that's when we also plow back the benefit to the customers of the distribution company.
So the more efficient they are, they're rewarded.
Yes, there's the reward for that. And then if they are able to exceed the targets we set for them, the performance targets, then they would have an equivalent monetary reward for them. So that's an additional to the revenue requirement that they enjoy.
And will these efficiencies, for example, trickle down to the consumers?
Yes, in the
rates?
next reset of the rates of the distribution companies, we would know already that they would need a lower O&M for them, and so we can set the level at a lower rate.
Okay. What are your thoughts on some members of Congress calling for the abolition of the EPIRA law? Ice, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. This has been discussed in several hearings in Congress. There's the possible repeal or probably amendment of the EPIRA. But what we are saying is that what we need as probably complementary bills on EPIRA to ensure that there will be enough investment, we encourage investors, and that's probably through minimizing this, the permits and all these different approvals at the different levels, both at the national and the local levels, because these are basically the challenges being faced by the private investors.
Kind of the hurdles that, that generating companies who are applying for
whatever franchise or probably the permits of putting up power plants, all these permits of licensing and the different levels, as I mentioned. So that's basically what we need, because this entails different agencies of the entire government. It's not only the energy agencies, not only the DOE or ERC, but rather other government agencies having all these requirements of documentation.
Now, some people are thinking and assuming that the EPIRA law will only benefit companies like Meralco and the cooperatives. Is that correct to say that the EPIRA law is really just going to benefit these companies, those who are involved in energy generation and transmission and distribution, or there is a concrete benefit to consumers?
As I said, the end objective of EPIRA is to introduce competition down to the retail level. And when we're talking of competition, it actually benefits not just the investors.
And we've seen that in other industries, right?
Yes. It works for the benefit mainly of the consumers. When you try to introduce competition, we assure the security of supply and at the affordable or competitive rates that will come out of the interplay of these competitive forces in the market.
Right. Now let's come to the meat. No? I guess a lot of viewers are watching now, are waiting for this question about their rights when it comes to what they will claim be the exorbitant rates. When they see their electric bill, oh no, why is it higher? And two questions there: why is it high? And secondly, what are their remedies? What can they do if they feel that their electric bill now is just totally off the charts and totally higher than the one they had the previous month? So what are their remedies? First of all, what do they look out for if they see a drastic increase in their electric bill, what did they look out for first, and secondly, what are their remedies in complaining or being heard?
One is if there is any unusual or irregular charging by the distribution companies, that can be brought to our office as a complaint, and we will look into this if indeed the distribution company charges rates different from the approved rates. And if the end users, also the consumers, they have any complaint against the distribution companies or any of the stakeholders, these complaints can be brought to us because we were given the jurisdiction to address any or all disputes pertaining to the electric service.
And what red flags should they look out for when it comes to reading their bill? As I mentioned, the electric bill sometimes is a little confusing, no? And a little bit, I guess, overwhelming for a lot of people. Sometimes some people just don't have the time to check it out. What should they be really focusing on when they check their bill?
One is
it the transmission component?
The biggest is the generation. But over this generation charge, the distribution company would need to comply with the formula that we established for them so that they can determine what their generation charge will be. So we can entertain complaints on that, and so we can determine. Is there a
hotline they can go, or a website or email?
Our website is erc.gov.ph, so you have all the contact numbers there and the email where you can send the complaint.
Can they expect them an immediate and prompt response
yes,
from the
yes,
ERC?
We respond to all queries or complaints, and for some that would need a formal proceeding, we advise the filing of a formal complaint.
All right, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for tonight. I would like to thank our guests, Attorney Saturnino Juan of the Energy Regulatory Commission and Ms. Irma Ice Exconde of the Department of Energy's Electric Power Industry Management Bureau for being with us tonight and explaining the unbundling of electricity tariffs. If you have any questions about our topic for tonight, you may post these on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Join us again next Monday as we discuss your legal rights. I'm Attorney Nepomuceno. Good night. God bless.